All right, welcome back to the podcast today. I'm super stoked and excited today to have Jeff Reid back on, former Navy SEAL, Afghan vet, and he did accomplish the amazing feat of finishing the 1,000-mile Iditarod dog mushing race. Jeff, thanks for coming on, brother.
Heck yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, man. So, we dove down your history last time. I think we'll just jump right into it, man. How did you, like, right away, man? How did you prep for the 1,000 miles? Like, what's the logistics? What's the training schedule lead up to? Because I'd watch you train. We were tracking you. I mean, it's not like you're going out for like a 5 mile run every few days, or you're training for a marathon. This is an entire logistics undertaking, along with which is already difficult, but then it's like, and all the endurance and everything out the training the dog. So like, dude, what was the lead up like that?
Yeah, so the Iditarod is a logistical nightmare. That's probably the best way to describe it. So it's 1,000 miles of remote territory that you're traveling through. There's no roads in or out of anywhere you're going. So all the gear you need to run 1,000 miles, whether it's dog food, meat snacks for the dogs, dog booties, extra gloves, gears, battery, like all the stuff that you would need to travel, survive with, to get you and a team of dogs to 1,000 miles needs to be packed up into individual bags and transported out to these remote areas and staged along the trail. So I forget how many checkpoints there are, 18 to 20 checkpoints, and each checkpoint has your resupply bag. So the checkpoints are broken up every 50 to 75 to 100 miles. And when you hit these checkpoints, your bags are there to resupply, and you can either stay there in a checkpoint to rest, or you can grab your gear and head on down the trail and camp somewhere down the trail. So come up with a plan on how you're going to break that all up and where you're going to camp and rest at along the trail. Man, it's a lot of work just to come up with that strategy. And then it's a lot of work to get all the gear, the dog food, and everything sent out. And that's just one small portion. Like what you were saying, the big thing is training up the dogs to get down there, and we start training every year, September 1st in the fall. Really, anytime the temperature gets below 50 degrees, we'll head out and do a training run. And we start first training runs 3 miles, and we slowly build up and build up and build up until we're capable of running 1,000 miles. So
So how many dogs, does it take to actually do the Iditarod? Like, that's the maximum, the minimum? We've talked about this before. Like, the bigger kennels have, a backlog of 20, 30 dogs. You're a smaller kennel. How did you manage to make sure that everyone was healthy, everything was ready to go? And like you said, it's like you're just trying to survive this first thought, just like get across the finish line. Like, how do you navigate, again, like I said, the logistical nightmare, but how do you, place the dogs in the right areas and get the strong ones and just navigate that whole roster?
yeah, so the Iditarod is done with 16 dogs, and out of that team of 16, you can take dogs off your team, but you can't put any new dogs onto your team. So if you start with 16 and you go down the trail and a dog would either get sick, tired, or injured and not be able to go any further down the trail, you can remove that dog from your team, but you can't backfill his spot with another dog. So if you drop a dog at a checkpoint, now you're down to 15 dogs, and you can go all the way down to you have five dogs is the lowest that you can go. And I have a total. When I started out this last winter, I had a total of 18 dogs I was training, and I broke that up into 2 9-dog teams. And I was running every day. I was essentially training dogs every day. One team would run one day, the next team would run the next day, and I would just alternate which team I was running all the way up until the first of the year. And once I hit the first of the year, I decided to run one giant team of 18 to kind of string together more long runs together to help training. So, like with the Iditarod, we would be doing 50 to 70 mile runs, give the dogs 5 hours of rest, and we'd be doing another one right after that. So, in order to train for that, you have to train multiple days in a row, essentially. So that's kind of why I created one giant team. So that's kind of what happened. And then slowly through through the year, just like any sports team, you have injuries or things happen where dogs kind of get removed from the team. We had two dogs develop a seizure disorder, just a genetic thing they were born with. When they would run anything over 25 to 30 miles, it would cause they would have a seizure. So that's how two of the dogs got removed from the training team and are now pet dogs. And then we had several other dogs just kind of off of weight and appetites that kind of just chose the best eaters because during the Iditarod, the dogs are going to be burning anywhere from 10 to 15,000 calories depending on the weather and temperature. And in order to replace all that calories that the dogs are burning, you need a dog that one likes to eat and you need good dog food. So I got the good dog food, and so I chose the dogs that kind of had the best appetite. That's kind of how I narrowed the team down.
Mhm. So then what's that like then? Like you said, how many miles are you going out then when you do the 9 dogs and switching off before you even get to January 1st? Like you said, how many hours does that take? What's like, I've seen you put together, we've done dog busting up there, like it's a lot. It's just to do a 9 dog run is a logistical challenge, but it's a hard day's work. So how do you prep for those and how long did you guys typically go?
Yeah, prep is going to be dependent on the weather. If it's warmer, if the weather's between 0 to 15 degrees above zero, the minimal gear is needed. The dogs probably don't even need booties because the snow conditions are just right. When it gets colder than zero, the dogs will start wearing booties just because the snow starts to fall apart and becomes more like sand. It can become abrasive to the dog's feet. So we'll start wearing booties then. And then if it gets below 15 degrees, the dogs will wear jackets. And just like each thing that the dogs need, piece of gear the dogs need, it takes longer to hook up, longer to prep the gear to get everything going. And obviously 9 dogs is going to be a lot faster to hook up than if you're hooking up a team of 16 to 18 dogs. So I
Mhm.
would get the gear and everything set up, and a team of 9 dogs harnessed, bootied, and ready to rock would be within 30 minutes. And then a team of 16 to 18,
Mhm.
if I, an hour and 15 minutes is about how long it would take me to hook up and get down the trail. And depending on what mileage we were running, let's say a 50-mile run would be like our typical training run, 30 to 50-mile run. We travel 9, 10 miles an hour is the sweet spot for the dogs. They can maintain that pace for a long time, and that's what we train at, and that's what we try to run at, is right around 9, 10 miles an hour. So if you're doing a 50-mile run, you're looking at 5 hours for just a run, an hour or two for hookup and taking back, and then an hour or two for feeding, and an hour scooping. So it's a full day event, when you're training dogs, and you have things on both sides. You got feeding and prep, and then you have feeding and gear clean up and all that stuff. And it's a lot of work to get a team of dogs trained up to what they need to be doing for the Iditarod.
I know, man. I mean, it's awesome. It's insane, but it's amazing. So, how many years you've been prepping for? Almost like 2 to 3 years now, correct?
So we've been working towards the Iditarod now for 7 years. First moved up to Alaska.
Okay. Wait, yeah.
Yeah, that was the whole reason we moved up here. Was we wanted to do the Iditarod, but we wanted to do the Iditarod with a team of dogs that we grew ourselves. So like dogs that we bred, raised from puppies, or chosen selectively from other mushers that we kind of put our own team together. That was what our initial goal was. A lot of people, I guess, do the Iditarod for different reasons. Some do it just to explore the wilderness. Some want to win the thing. For me, it was about growing a team of dogs and establishing a bond with that team of dogs, and going and just seeing the different countries, different parts of Alaska, and everything. So that was what our main goal was. So yeah, so we showed up to the start line. I remember standing at the start line of the race, looking down my team, and I remember thinking like back to when all the dogs, they're slamming in the harness, ready to go at the start of the Iditarod. Everything we've been working up for the last 7 years, and I remember thinking back, like I can remember when each one of these dogs were little puppies, and the day they were born. So it's kind of a cool feeling, finally getting to that point.
That's awesome. I know we were talking before, and every year was a little bit rocky, or it was a little kind of unstable whether you guys would do it, like do the Iditarod or not, or shift back another year. So what was that tipping point this year? You're like, because I think we had talked before, and you're like, we don't know, we might. What was that tipping point? If you're like, okay, green light, let's go. And how'd you feel when it was like, holy shit, we're doing it?
Yeah, so the big thing that changed was kids. When we first moved up here, we moved
Mhm.
up here with just my wife and one dog, and then it slowly changed to my wife and 25 dogs. And then we had kids on top of that. And once we had kids, that was whenever we slowly started like taking a step off from racing, taking a step back from racing, and deciding if we really wanted to do it. Because like to train up a team of dogs to do something like the Iditarod takes a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of money. And so after we had my first son, I took a year off from that, and we didn't do any racing. I did some tours and some fun runs, and still had dogs. And then the year after that, I decided to get back into racing, and we did a 200-mile race and had fun and used that as a qualifier. And we needed one more race to qualify for the Iditarod, and that was when my second son was born. Then, so I decided, you know what? Well, I'll just train up to do one race this year. It's a 300-mile race. I think I'll be able to do that. And depending on how that goes, the following year I'll reevaluate if I want to do the Iditarod. So did the I think it was yeah, I ended up doing the Quest 300, Yukon Quest 300, and had a great time doing that. We finished and had my entire dog team come across the finish, and dogs look great. That was the last event for that winter. And then going into it was last summer. Me and my wife were trying to figure out what we wanted to do for this winter. I remember she asked me if I wanted to do the Iditarod. I was like, you know what, I don't know if we're going to do it. It's just a lot with two kids now, and the amount of training that it would take to do that. And she's like, well, what if we got like daycare or babysitter? And it's like in Alaska, finding a daycare is kind of tough, especially out where we live. And so she ended up finding a daycare that worked for our kids. And my oldest kid has some mental disability, so it takes a little bit of a special daycare for him. So, but we found it and got him in a daycare. And once that happened, it kind of freed up time for me to put into training up for the Iditarod. So that's kind of we decided to go ahead and move forward with it then. So it was late summer, early
Mhm.
fall when we finally decided, you know what, we're going to go forward with this. We've been working way too hard. And the other thing that happened is we had the team to do it at last summer. Like we looking at our kennel, looking down the yard, all the dogs are in the prime ages to run the Iditarod. So dogs in their prime ages are anywhere from 2 to 7, and we had a kennel full of that age. So it was kind of like it was now or never kind of thing. So if we were going to do it, it was then. So we decided to go ahead.
Before we keep going with the podcast, I want to drop this week's discount code for 9line Apparel. We're not just a brand, we're a lifestyle that celebrates the speed of freedom, courage, and American values. Go check out our gear, including hoodies, glassware, flags, jackets, hats, patches, and much more. All material is ethically sourced, so every shirt you buy is free of slave labor. As a veteran-owned and operated company, we take pride in giving back to those who've served. Your purchase helps us contribute to charitable initiatives supporting veterans and first responders. This episode's discount code is Iditarod20. Iditarod 20. Say again. Iditarod 20. Not 10, not 15, but 20%. Not 25, because that's a bit excessive. So get over to the store and get yourself 20% off your next purchase. While you're at it, like, listen, and subscribe to 9line Podcast for future discount codes and more conversations with amazing guests like today. Now back to the podcast. That's awesome. So then, what you kind of briefed up on it a little bit, but what was that like? Finally, like, after all the logistics planning, getting everything, all the bags where they need to go, the lead up. What was that feeling like when you're like, here we are, this is the starting line? And it's like that, not, you almost feel like sometimes the workup is the hard part, but not, I gotta imagine that's not true. you got, all right, we got here. Now the hard parts. Like, what was that feeling like?
No, man, you're exactly right. looking back the whole thing, now that I've done the Iditarod, looking back at it all, the hardest part was getting to the start line. So much can happen from the time you start. Like, even if you just take it from the year that we did it, like starting back in September, just getting to that start line is a tremendous feat in itself, especially if you look at the number of dogs I have. Majority of the kennels have 2 to 3 different teams that they have training just in case they would have injuries or dogs that didn't want to, get sick or something like that. So they have a bigger depth to pull from. I don't really have that luxury. I have essentially by the time the Iditarod happened, I was down to 17 dogs, and that's kind of what I pulled from. And so that's the thing with starting with a small kennel. You have little to no room for air, and you still got to train though, and you still got to train hard. But trying to find that line where you're not overtraining but not undertraining at the same time was what I guess we've had to kind of figure out on the fly, and I think we did a pretty good job of it. But that was the hardest part. It's definitely getting to the start line, going through the entire winter of training up a dog team, kind of solo. Whenever I wasn't training dogs, my wife was with the kids, and so I kind of had I trained the dogs myself, and it was it was definitely good. I was having a blast up until probably the first of the year, and then after that, it started to be. I lost all the motivation and was running solely on the discipline. It was the excitement of it all kind of wore off by the first of the year, and it was strictly off of discipline to keep training after that. And then also by then, we were dealing with some 50 below days and some really cold weather that made it even more challenging. But yeah, getting to the start line was the toughest part.
Yeah. And Alaska too. I mean, we've been up there and -15, but you're going down to -50. What do you just beyond the Iditarod? What's your gear like going into? Oh yeah, I got to go train today. It's -50 below. Well, what are you rocking? Like, I just people just listen like, what the fuck is he wearing? At
Yeah.
-50, like it's something that's barely survivable.
So -50, I didn't go out with the dogs when it was -50. But the thing is, with the Iditarod, what I was kind of getting at with you lose the motivation is whenever it hits -50, yeah, it might be too cold to go out for the dogs. I didn't want to put the dogs out at -50, but the thing is, Iditarod gear bags still need packed. You cannot afford to go a day without working. So -50 out, I was outside and taking frozen blocks of meat and running them through meat saws, cutting little candy bar size shapes of meat out for the dogs for meat snacks, and putting them in little baggies and shipping them off to different remote parts in Alaska. That's how I spent my days at 50 below. But what I wore was I just waffle pants, soft shell pants over top that, puffy layer of pants over top that, bibs, and then underneath my top layers were waffle layers, micro puff, full puff layer, and then a parka over top of that. Neck gaiter pulled up over to the nose, hood with a wolf and Wolverine fur ruff zipped up to the only thing that was exposed was my eyes. So when it's 50 degrees or below zero, anything that's exposed for more than a couple seconds, man, it's going to start freezing pretty quickly. So you got to stay pretty protected. And I was out there for 8 hours that day,
Dude,
man,
that's
cutting
wild.
meat through the saw. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, and I think that leads into the next question. How do you feed 18 dogs? Like, well, how do you do that? Like on any given day, let alone on racing days?
So morning routine, I wake up and I'll go out and I feed the dogs. In the middle of the winter, we feed primarily meat mixed with team dog. Uh, so I get blocks of meat, 15 pounds blocks of meat, and I'll put it in a 5-gallon bucket and fill that bucket up with hot water and turn that block of meat into soup. And then I'll add a bunch of kibble into that soup, and then the dogs will get 1 scoop of that in the morning and then 1 scoop after they're done running. When we're running, the dogs will get fed every 2 hours, and I'll have little candy bar size shapes of beef or fish or eggs or something that I cut through a saw, and every 2 hours, each dog gets a little meat snack. So that's how the dogs get fed. They're constantly eating. I mean, They're eating in the morning when they go out for a run. They're eating every 2 hours during the run, and when they get back, they get fed another big meal. And then
Yeah, and so
races,
and
for races, when we go to races
oh,
and
go
we're
go ahead.
resting at a checkpoint, the way I feed in a checkpoint is I have a little dog food cooker that runs off of methanol or heat, and I'll dump the methanol in there, light it, and it has an insert. I'll put the insert in, and I'll start shoveling snow in that insert, and then it will melt. The snow will melt in the water. Eventually, that water will boil, and I'll dump that hot water into a cooler that's full of meat and kibble and turn it into a soup, and that's what the dogs eat during races or camp outs and stuff like that.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember seeing it when we were up training with you or running the dogs. They would eat the snow with their, and you'd see their tongues. Their like tongues are like double the size of kind of the dogs we have down here in the 48. And I was like, what are they doing? You're like, oh, they're drinking. They're like basically eating the snow as they go. And I'd never seen that before, like just dogs running and then they just lap up the snow. So I guess that's one of the techniques or one of the, their instincts to keep cool or keep hydrated through the race, correct?
Yeah, that's what we call dipping. We'll be running down the trail, and you'll see the dogs kind of stick their head off and bite the snow on the sides, and that's called dipping. That's how they take a drink, and that's just an adaptation of the northern breed that they have. And all animals this far north are adapted to eat snow and use that for hydration because all the water systems are technically frozen, all winter long, and yeah, so the dogs' metabolisms are more advanced than ours. Where like if we would eat snow to try to stay hydrated, we would actually dehydrate ourselves. Our bodies would use more energy to melt that snow and use that to convert it to water. So we would end up dehydrating. But the dogs can actually eat the snow and melt it internally and use that for hydration, and that's how they stay hydrated.
Mhm. And so then you're saying too that they're going through 10 to 15,000 calories a day, or is that over the course of the entire Iditarod?
No, that's per day. They're going through that many calories per day.
Holy shit. So what kind of, you said you're making the meat snacks. How do you densely pack that? It's almost like bodybuilders. Like how do you put that many calories together in that type of density to, like I said, to go through the races and training in general?
And to put it together without making them sick. That's the hard part because you pack that much
Mhm.
calories. The best way to get all that calories in is through fat. But you start packing them full of fat, then they start getting diarrhea, and it can cause stomach problems essentially. So there's definitely a formula for how to
Mhm.
pack in all those calories, uh, and that's where the nice thing is meat snacks. Really good every 2 hours. Meat snacks. I use and it really depends on the weather. If it gets really cold, the dogs are going to crave a higher fat meat snack. So they have options. In the sled during the Iditarod, I have beef fat, 100% beef fat. I have straight beef. I have beef liver and heart mixture, and I have eggs and a fish. So they can be choosy, and give them if they don't want one, I'll try the other. If they don't want the other, so they have the option to pick what they want, and each dog can prefer a different thing. But that's how you pack all that food in. Is every 2 hours they get a snack, and then the dog food we feed whenever we get to a checkpoint or after a big run is specifically formulated for sled dogs. So it's a higher fat, higher protein, higher calorie formula to pack in all that nutrients all at once. So that's and the dog food we use is Team Dog. Another team guy created dog food, Mike Ritland, and so we use his stuff, and dogs do awesome on it.
Mhm. And so then between each checkpoint, then during the Iditarod, uh, what's the distance between each one? Like you said you had about 18 checkpoints or something along those lines. So you're looking at between 50 to 75 miles per checkpoint, or even longer. Like
Yeah, that's right, man. It's
how do you?
roughly
Well, you and
50 to,
okay.
some of them can be 30, some of them can be like 75 to 100. It depends on the checkpoint, the year of the race, because every other year they alternate. There's a northern route and a southern route that can change. So, um, yeah, it roughly 30 to 100 miles is the distance between checkpoints.
Mhm. It's so the dogs are getting taken care of. So what do you do between each checkpoint? And then how do you like what are you eating? What's your training? How many calories are you burning? I mean, you're staying awake for all this too. I know you're running on minimal sleep, correct?
Yeah, that's the thing. The Iditarod honestly was on Bud's level sleep deprivation. I barely got hardly any sleep during the 12 days I was out there. So when you roll into a checkpoint, you got a ton of work to do because the only one that can take care of your dogs is you as the musher. Nobody else can take care of your dogs. So when you roll into the checkpoint, the first thing I always do is I walk to the front of the team. As I walk to the front of the team, I'm throwing dog food out on the ground for the dogs, and they can start snacking away. Then once I get to the top of the team, I walk back through the team and take off all their booties, all the dogs' booties they have on their paws. And then I'll grab a bale of straw and walk back up to the front of the team and throw out straw for all the dogs. And then I'll start cooking their meal. That's what I was talking about, the heat and the methanol and melting snow and dumping that into a cooler full of meat and kibble. And then I'll get the dogs fed. And usually by then I'm at like an hour, hour and a half into it. Once the dogs eat, I collect all the dog bowls and clean up everything and start packing the sled out for the next run and start laying out the booties for the following run. And if I'm at a checkpoint for 6 hours, I might be lucky enough to get 2 hours of sleep, 2, 3 hours of sleep if I'm lucky. So before I'm up getting ready to go for the next run. And we did that for 12 days, and that was kind of routine. But by the end of it, man, you kind of get into the routine where you show up to the checkpoint and you're just used to running off of 2 hours of sleep and you get kind of adjusted to it.
Hmm. And so, what was your favorite snacks and food that you're taking along?
I pretty much lived off of candy bars, bone broth, and
Yeah.
Uncrustables. The thing is, you kind of, whenever you're out there in the cold in the winter up in Alaska, you got to eat things that don't get to be like bricks when they get to 40 below. The best thing you could have out there is the
Hmm.
Uncrustables because they, for some reason, even at 40 below, they turn brittle. They don't get hard. So that's always kind of a nice thing to have out there. You never have to worry about breaking your teeth off. Versus sometimes, like you carry like a Snickers or something like that, you try to bite into that at 40 below. You better be careful. You break your teeth off.
I was gonna say, I remember when we did the mountain warfare training at Bridgeport. It wasn't freezing yet. It was probably like August or September, but they were talking about, hey, make sure you bring up the king size Snickers bars up on, because we were just going through the mountains for probably like a week straight, and so I bought a bunch and stuck them in my ammo pouches. Per the instructors, but but I remember that it was helping a lot. But when it did get cold at night, biting into those things, yeah, they started getting a little, little brickish, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this isn't as good as it was like during the day when it was warm. But yeah, it's hilarious that the Uncrustables is is the go-to food. Is that what some of the other mushers use, or what are like the preferred stuff of like some of the other racers? Do you know at all?
Yeah, Uncrustables is a big one. Um, Trail mix is another good one. Bone broth is one thing that I brought this year that I just started using. I really liked it. Instant bone broth, 10 grams of protein, it's enough to get you going. And the thing is, whenever it's like 50 below zero, 40 below zero out there, like you don't want to drink. But like having hot bone broth was nice. Like I still wanted to drink. And whenever a lot of people don't realize during the Iditarod, it's a difficult trail. There's some steep climbs, a lot of hills you got to go up and over, and it's a physical put out. Like you're off the sled. A lot of times when you're going up those hills, you're physically pushing the sled as the dogs are pulling, working together. And then you're some other hills, you're off to the side, running beside with the team, and it's a physical put out. So like you got to stay hydrated, else you'll start cramping up, and your body will start to deteriorate. And you need to do everything you can to avoid that because I feel like once you start cramping up, it's hard to stay ahead of it. Then so I was getting to the point to where I was drinking a bone broth on the trail. I had one of the big Yetis that I would fill up with like a bone broth, and I would drink a bone broth soup on the trail. And when I would get to the checkpoint, I would drink a liquid IV and then just a regular thing of water, full of water. So I was staying extra hydrated. But yeah, that's kind of what I lived off of. And I got done with the Iditarod. I told my wife that my inner child would have loved that, going out camping with dogs and eating nothing but candy bars the entire time, Uncrustables.
I mean, like, no, I agree with you. It sounds fun now. I might, I'll just go do
Yeah.
that and not run the Iditarod. No, dude, that's awesome. So then, I want to say boredom because I don't think that's probably the right word. But so in between these, I mean, like I said, you're on 7 hours or so in between each checkpoint. How do you, I don't want to say keep yourself occupied, but like, I imagine there's a lot of stuff going through your head, but I mean, is there points where you zone out? Is there points, or is it just constantly, like you're always thinking, you're always moving, obviously what's the next hill? I shouldn't say GPS, but what's our location? How far have we gone? Do you have a map? Exactly what the checkpoints are? Are you allowed to use a GPS? Like what's some of those logistics as well?
Yeah, I feel like it probably different in different phases of the race. So first phase of the race, like the first 200 miles, I was kind of like, I was still listening to music and kind of running with the dogs, you're kind of a little bit carefree. Like you're still in the like, oh, Menti Iditarod is still like fresh, and you're living through like those excited feelings of like, oh man, I'm at the start of the Iditarod. This is awesome. And then by after mile 300, that excitement wears off, and you realize like you still got a long ways to go ahead of you. So I started off the race. I was listening to music, and then after that, you realize like something happens after 200 miles where you become so in tuned with your dogs that you're kind of like one element. You're kind of like one machine. You're operating together. I guess it'd be kind of like describe it'd be like a platoon of dudes overseas that have operated, spent 2 years doing a workup together, and then they did a deployment, and then like at the peak of their deployment, that's like how synced up those dudes are. Is similar to what a musher probably experiences with their dog teams, or at least what I experienced with my dog team. By mile 300, I didn't want to wear any headphones. So I felt
So
like
then,
it
like
took
I said,
away
it's just
from
in
me,
between.
like
So you're
syncing up
synced
with
up
my
with them.
dogs and being
What was
on
what
the
was
same
the
sheet of
most
music
challenging
and in tune
part?
with them.
Oh,
So like as I'm watching the dogs, as a musher, I'm constantly focused on the dogs in front of me. And what I'm looking for is the dog's gaits. I'm looking at the lines that they're pulling the sled from. And I'm just monitoring all that. And there's 16 dogs in front of me, and I'm just constantly going down and back up the line, down and back up the line. And the second a dog's gait changes from what its normal gait is, I was on top of it, and I could pick it out right away. So like that's what I was looking to as a musher, and that's like I was trying to be as in tune with the dogs as I possibly could. Now, the one thing that happens is with all the sleep deprivation, there's been times where I was like trying to focus on the dogs, but I was like in and out of sleep. This is later on in the race. I was so tired that I was like falling asleep, but I was trying to stay as focused as I could, but I couldn't quite focus. It's hard to explain unless you found yourself in that situation before. But like that was the difficult side is when you started getting to that level of tiredness, and nothing you did could snap out. Like you could drink water, you could take snow and put it on your face, you could get off the sled and run for a little bit, but nothing was like waking you up. That was whenever it was kind of hard to focus and not miss a turn or anything like that. I didn't have a map. The way dog mushers navigate is the trail was marked by a trail stake. So there's stakes that are marked in the trail. If there's a right turn, the trail stakes are on the right. There's 2 markers on the right side. If there's a left turn, there's going to be 2 trail markers on the left side indicating a turn. So the trail was pretty well marked, but I did carry a GPS that had the locations of the next village or the next checkpoint.
mm-hmm. And when that sleep deprivation started like kind of kicking in, what day was that? Like when did that really, like said, that challenge of trying to stay awake and it was really starting to beat you down? What day did that kind of start kicking in? And then you were like, all right, I gotta get through to this so we can get to the finish line.
Day 3. Day 3 was when I first started
No.
noticing. Yeah, it happened pretty quick. By day 3, because I get 3 days of no sleep, it hits you hard, so I think by day 3, I only had like 2 hours or 3 hours of sleep, not much. And I remember going into it, like at that point, you're in a very remote area of Alaska, and I remember running, and I could hear like people clapping and cheering, kind of like sounded like the start of the race. And I was like seeing people on the trail, and I knew that there was nobody out there, but like I'm seeing people and I'm hearing people, and like I know it's just my head. And then because once you get up and over the Alaska range, you're essentially in the heart of Alaska then. And we were heading into the checkpoint in Nikolai, which is the first native village on the trail. And I was 10 miles from Nikolai, and I started like dozing off, hitting that tired spot. So where nothing I could do was like I was dozing off and I couldn't stay awake. And 10 miles started seeming like it was taking a lot longer than what 10 miles should have taken to travel. And I started wondering, like, did I miss the turn? Am I actually on my way to the next checkpoint? Because I could still see the trail markers, but I wasn't sure if there was like a turn off to the right that I missed that takes me to the checkpoint or something. And I thought I missed it. And I got to the point where I was making the decision, like, well, I'm not turning around. If I miss the checkpoint, I'll deal with the repercussions of it whenever I hit the next one. So, but luckily we ended up hitting the checkpoint not too far after that. But that was like, when you start getting that tired, you start like questioning yourself. Did I miss a turn? Is the checkpoint coming up? How long have I actually been traveling? Because like time you start losing the ability to tell how much time's going by and stuff. So I definitely started using I stopped going off of time, like what time is it on a certain day. I was only going off of what hour I was on my stopwatch and how far I was going off my GPS. That's kind of how I synced up my days and could tell time, and ran the team off of that.
Mm-hmm. And then, so you're racing through the night, correct?
Correct. Yep. So the race never stops from the time it starts. It's ongoing, and it's up to the mushers to take the rest whenever they want to rest, whether they do rest at checkpoints, rest at nights, rest during days, rest out in the trail. It doesn't matter. The clock goes and doesn't stop until you come across the finish line. There are mandatory rests that mushers have to take. They have to take a 24-hour rest anywhere in the race, and they have to take an 8-hour rest somewhere on the Yukon River, and then they have to take an 8-hour rest in White Mountain, which is the last 75 miles from the finish line. But other than that, you can rest at any point along the race for as long as you want.
And what's the reason for the rest? Is that something that, like, is it a safety precaution type thing, or is it just part of the rules, is tradition, or why do they have those certain rest periods?
Yeah, I think it was just part of the rules early on. I don't know if it was deemed for safety for mushers and the dogs. I'm definitely glad it's there, because when I took my 24-hour rest into Kotna, which is at like mile 325, and it was drastic. I definitely needed it. So the dogs needed it, but I think mostly it's for the mushers, to get a little bit of sleep back into them before they start heading on into the Yukon, essentially. And then when you hit to the Yukon, because you're going into the Yukon River, you're traveling up and over the Alaska range, so you're working hard and dealing with hills, and you're putting out, running behind the sled and pushing it up and over those hills. So when you hit the Yukon River, a lot of times you're tired and exhausted. So that's a good reason probably that they have the 8-hour along the Yukon River. But I took my 8-hour rest right as soon as we hit Ruby, which is the first village in the Yukon, and just set myself up to take on the Yukon River. So.
What was the most challenging part of the trail? Like just physically, I mean, did the weather turn on you? Like what was kind of the hardest part?
Yeah, the hardest part, the trail has several different hard sections. The most technical sections are within the first 500 miles of the race. You have the Happy River Steps, which is steep drops followed by sharp 90-degree turns. And then you have the Dalzell Gorge, which is a steep drop with trees and stuff in between it. You have to drive your sled around, else you'll run right into the trees. And then you have a section called the Burn, which is a section of 20 to 25 miles with little to no snow. And you're pretty much running beside the sled on that trail, just because it puts too much friction whenever there's just dirt that the sled's gliding on. So those are the three most technical sides of the trail. But as far as Mother Nature and dealing with the elements, the hardest parts of that are going to be the Yukon River and then the Bering Sea coast. So when we hit the Yukon River, you're essentially in the heart of the interior then, and that's where you start getting your really cold temperatures. And also the Yukon River is huge. It's a huge river. It's like over a mile wide in some places. So wind can really be channelized through there, and it can rip through there. Um, so when we hit the Yukon River, it was actually calm when we hit it. It was just cold. So first night on the Yukon River, it got down to 35 below zero, which was cold. But I'm from Fairbanks, so it's just a normal night. So it sounds cold, but for me, it was just a normal night out there running dogs. And then the following night, it got down to 45 below zero, and we started dealing with the 25-mile-an-hour wind, and wind started picking up. I think the real feel was like 75 below zero, or it was cold. And that was the first like really challenging time where it was like, okay, this is cold. If we would mess up in this situation, it would be bad. So that's just what happens whenever it hits that level of cold. The level of focus and the repercussions for messing up drastically increases. So you just got to be on your A game and not mess up out there whenever it's that cold. It could be life or death. So we just stayed focused and kept trying to move to the next checkpoint when it got cold like that. And little by little, we chewed up the mileage and finished the Yukon River section and started making our way to the Bering Sea coast.
So that's the most challenging. Was there kind of like the most like a dangerous part where you're like, holy shit, this could say life or death, but something that's incredibly dangerous that's not so much as challenging, but there was like just a dangerous leg of the trail that just like if we really fuck this up, this is gonna be really bad.
The last leg of the Yukon River was kind of, I had that weird the hairs on my neck kind of standing up because we dropped down into the river and we were running. There was one turn you come around and the river like it's much wider than the normal section. It's like almost 2 miles wide. It's huge. And when we hit that section, the temperature, you could feel the temperature drop. And it was probably 45 to 50 below zero down there. We were dealing with winds, and the next guy behind me was 8 to 12 hours behind me. So like if I messed up out there, the consequences would be dire. If the dog would stop or I would fall off the sled and lose my team or something like that. That was in my head. Like, okay, no mistakes can be made out here right now. Stay focused, keep moving, don't stop, get to the next checkpoint. That's kind of whenever I start hitting those, that was like the one point on the race where that dialogue was in my head. The other challenging spot.
How long did that oh, go ahead.
Sorry, man. The other challenging spot that we had on the race, I think every musher has, especially a rookie musher who's never been out exposed to it, is whenever you get out into the Bering Sea ice. There was one run where we had a 50-mile trail that we were traveling to the next checkpoint. It was all done on the sea ice. So imagine being out in the middle of the ocean on a boat where you don't see land anywhere. It's just ocean, left, right, up, down. You see ocean everywhere you look. No land to go off of. Imagine it all frozen now and everything's white. And then the clouds in the sky are gray. So everything you look around, up, down, left, right, forward, back, everything is white or gray. And you're doing that. You're on a trail running in that environment for 8 hours and nothing changes. Not only is that mentally taxing for us as humans, that's mentally exhausting for the dogs. And they can be like, what the heck are we doing? It can really like bore them out and kind of bum them out. And they can really start hitting like some low points for the dogs can get kind of poopy during that situation. So what I did is I actually teamed up with another friend of mine, Lauro Eklund, and we kind of tag teamed that section, a trail. We ran it together. He ran in front of me and I ran behind him, and we would switch, and I would run in front of him and he'd run behind me, and we would pass each other and help keep the dogs like mentally stimulated a little bit. And it's always better to do something like that with another dude anyway. So that was the other hard part of the race that I just never dealt with, never been out there for that long on a trail like that. Either have my dog, so that's how we tackled the sea ice.
Mm-hmm. Nice, yeah. I mean, it sounds insane. Like I said, jumping onto the Bering Sea and doing that. So then, when you're like I said, going that type of distance, and like I said, you're in that type of situation, so you're there for 8 hours, and are you like white knuckling it then for that 8 hours? Like, don't fall off the sled, don't fall off the sled. Like, this could get really bad.
The really there was no white knuckling or sketchy parts where I was like really hanging on. And after the burn, then it was pretty much straight flat trail, pretty easy to maneuver. It was just
Mhm.
don't fall asleep and fall off. That was that was the thing that was going through my mind. And there was a few times where like I was getting so tired where I actually physically tied myself to the sled in case I would fall off. I would just get drugged behind it. The dogs are trained to always move
Mhm.
forward. So if you would fall off, they're not going to just stop all of a sudden and wait for you. They're going to keep going, and you'll find them eventually if you keep walking down the trail. But they're not going to wait for you.
Mhm. And so, how many teams were there in this Iditarod?
There were, oh, man, that's a great question. I think there were 37, 38 teams in Iditarod.
Mhm. How many? What was the attrition rate? How many made it? How many? How many
Uh,
fell out?
I believe there were two or three people. No, there might have been four or five people that withdrew from the race.
Okay. Do you know the reasons why? Or because I remember we talked about this before, and it's not the craziest if you like drop out of the race or something goes wrong, especially when you're a smaller kennel. Like, did you know the reasons why they typically did, or just it just wasn't
Yeah,
working out, or
there's
the
a
dog
million things
just
that could
dogs
happen.
injured?
So one of the teams that dropped out was a team from the lower 48, and I don't know what their training schedule was like, but I can imagine how intimidating that would be for a team from the lower 48 coming up to Alaska and dropping in on the Yukon River with 45 below temperatures and 25-mile-an-hour winds. That can be a little bit intimidating, I could imagine. I don't know if that's what happened or what, but there's a lot of things that can happen other than that. Like like you have dogs from all over the world. There were people from Switzerland. There were people from the lower 48. There's dog teams from all over the world, all coming together here, running the same trail. So dogs can pick up different bugs and illnesses along the trail. And if they get a bug or illness and they get sick and they don't want to eat anymore and they're burning 15,000 calories in a day, you start running into problems that way. So that could be another problem that could have happened. So there's a million different things that can happen uh, out there on the trail that's out of the musher's control. That you could do everything perfect, but just the way things work out just aren't your way. So
Mhm. So when you're on the trail and you're seeing you're getting closer and closer. Did you have like one of those moments of just like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like, we're doing it. We're done. We're close. It's just that feeling of like, this is amazing. Did you have that anytime along the trail, but like not so much in the last leg, but just kind of like while you're doing it? I know you say you're sleep deprived, but did you ever get that like boost of emotion? You're like, yeah, holy shit, this is phenomenal.
yeah,
This is,
I think
we're
that
going to,
was
we're going to do
happening after
this.
my 24-hour rest. I left to Katna and we were running through Ophir. So I don't know if I told you about Ophir. Ophir is like an old gold rush city or an old gold rush village. So you're running through this place and you're seeing old buildings and mining equipment that's been abandoned for years. And you're like, I remember thinking like, oh heck yeah, man, this is freaking awesome. Like doing the Iditarod, my dogs are kicking butt and like we're freaking doing it. We're almost halfway through the whole thing. But what happens, I felt like after that is I got so sleep deprived, I turned into like almost everything became like autopilot to where it's like I would get to a checkpoint, do my chores, take a nap, wake up, hook the dogs up, go for a run, come back, go to the next checkpoint, repeat everything. And even when I finished, it was like when I came across the finish line, I was so out of it from sleep deprivation that it didn't really hit me that I was done. I got back and took a few hours of sleep, and I woke up still feeling like I needed to go out and start booting the dogs to run to the next checkpoint. It wasn't until like the next day that I was like, holy shit, we just freaking ran the Iditarod.
That's awesome. Like, you're just exhausted. You're just like, yeah, man, we did it. That's cool. Whatever. Let's go. I'm
Yeah.
out. And speaking of that too, you enlisted, like, like you said, it's a giant undertaking. So you had family members come up and friends and to handle each checkpoint. Like, what were the roles then of each, of like going to each checkpoint? Cause they can, like you said, they can't assist, but they were helping in other ways, correct?
So yeah, it takes a freaking village to do the Iditarod.
Mm-hmm.
I had, especially if you have kids, also. So my mom and dad came up, and they were essentially the kid handlers. They took control of the kids and were my kid handlers. And then I had my wife, my buddy PJ, and Ashley. And Jerry's sister Emily, and Meredith and Levi. They were all there to help with the start, and so like you're down in Anchorage for the start for like 4 or 5 days, and the dogs are all down there. Dogs need walked, and poop needs scooped still,
Mm-hmm.
and dogs need fed. There's still chores that need to be done. Meanwhile, like as the musher, you have a bunch of meetings and meet and greets and stuff that you have to go to. So they like the people that were back were essentially taking care of the dogs, making sure they were getting walked and exercised while I was doing meetings to start. And then when it came time to actually do the start, you need people to hold the dog team back before you actually launch out the gate because you remember how the dogs are super excited and like slamming in a harness to
Yeah.
go, and so you need people to like help restrain them before you go. So they kind of were all there to help me go. But the one thing that's different about the Iditarod than any other race I've ever done is when you start, you don't see anybody that helps you until you finish. So like there's no driving into any of these checkpoints because they're so far remote. There's no roads that are in or out of them. So whenever I started, I didn't see any of the people that helped me until I got back from Iditarod.
Oh, really? So they were finish or starting line, then finish line. That's it.
Yeah, and then whenever I got on the trail, they drove back to Fairbanks, and then they cared for the remaining dogs that stayed home, like the home team dogs.
Mm-hmm. And so once you finish this, I mean, like I said, you're exhausted when you did it. We talked before. Now it's like getting the dogs back from Nome. Correct? Nome is the finish line.
Nome's the finish line, so yeah, that's another whole chore in itself. To get the dogs back, you have to fly them and all the gear and stuff out of there. So you just pay. We used Alaska Air. Alaska Air is awesome for doing that. They kind of have a thing for the dog mushers and that Iditarod that they will ship the dogs back to Anchorage. And when we ship the dogs back to Anchorage with the sled and all of our other gear, my buddy PJ and Ashley were down there waiting for the dogs with the dog truck and picked them all up and all their gear and stuff and drove it back to Fairbanks for us.
Mm-hmm.
Give me
So
1
now
minute, man. I
that
gotta plug
you've
this.
accomplished this, like, oh yeah, go for it. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry about that. The computer was running low on juice.
Okay. Yeah. So now that you've met the goal after 7 years, and I know we had talked about this prior and everything. Like, so what's your next one? Do you want to rerun it again? Are you doing a dog mushing? Like before we even started the podcast, you talk about family and you're expecting your third kid here in the next few months. And so what's now beyond the Iditarod?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. The question I get asked the most is, am I going to run it again? And in order for me to run it again, I would need to get another 4 to 5 dogs. I had some dogs retire after this year, and some dogs decided they don't want to do something like the Iditarod. Some dogs just would rather just run a few miles, and some dogs would rather run 1,000 miles. So if I would do the Iditarod again, I would need to get 4 to 5 dogs, and with increasing family size and everything, I'm not trying to grow my kennel. So I don't think I'll do the Iditarod again. Like I said before, everyone does it for their own reasons. Some people want to do the Iditarod to win it. Some people do it to have the experience and travel through some of the most remote, beautiful places that you can imagine. I did it because, first time I came on here and talked to you, I talked about Frank and the bond I had with him. And when I lost Frank, man, I felt like I would never get a bond like I had with him. But I can tell you, after doing something like the Iditarod, it's there, man. It's just doing things like that with them. So, yeah, I'm just going to continue to go out and have dogs, and I'll go out and do more adventure stuff with them. But I don't foresee myself doing any more racing or anything like that. It'll be going out and doing things like whenever you came up, we went up to Denali and did that camp out, doing stuff like that. That's what I foresee me
Hmm.
doing in the future, is more camping and maybe doing more
Yeah.
hunting and fishing and stuff incorporated with the dogs.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's cool, man. Like I said, it's meeting you. It was back in 2020, and then 2021. And we've been keeping in touch, and it's awesome to see you accomplish the Iditarod, because I've been talking about it for we're going on the 4 years that I've known you, and then on top of that, you guys as a family and everything with your wife, and wanting to do it for 7 years and now finally accomplishing it. It's kind of crazy to see you on the other side of that, because I mean it's a massive undertaking. It's 1,000 miles. Yeah, so it was like when you were, I was like, "Are you going to do it again?" Kind of wondering if you're what you're thinking, but it's awesome to see that you accomplished it and you crushed it, and so now moving. I don't want to say moving on, but you're going to be doing something still with dog mushing, but you'll shift from not doing 1,000-mile races anymore.
Yeah, the thing with the dogs is it's a lifestyle. When you start getting into dog mushing, it's something you do because you love the lifestyle of it, because it's not glamorous work. I don't know any dog mushers who make a lot of money doing it. The dogs tend to eat every single dime you tend to make. So, and when you get dogs, like,
Mhm.
you're committed to them for their life. So it's not something that you just walk away from right at the drop of a hat. So, the dogs that I have now are
Mhm.
amazing dogs. If I wanted to do the Iditarod, I'd have about 12 of them that would still be down to do that again. But instead of doing something like that, I just think we're going to be out here and doing more like adventures, and maybe doing more trips up to the Arctic and more trips out to Denali, and more adventure style camping and stuff like that with them.
Mhm.
And now my kids are going to be old enough now to start. My kids are going to be old enough now to start, getting on the back a little bit, so they'll probably start doing a little bit more family mushing stuff like that with them.
Awesome, dude. That's great. So then, I hate this. I always hate this. I shouldn't say question, but the way it's phrased. But so you're gonna get a real job now? Is that what some people are saying?
Man, I don't think I'll
Have you
ever
gotten
have
that
a real
question?
job. I think I'm capable of having a real job.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, I know. It's so. How does that feel then, though? I mean, because it's a big accomplishment. You crushed it after 7 years. You did it. Is that is that just, I won't say nervous or anything like that, but I mean, is that kind of a feeling where you're, not saying you got to fill up that goal again, or fill that need of the next big goal, or is this something like, hell yeah, we did it, I'm happy with that, now let's, do you have anything else that's on your mind that you do want to accomplish in the same manner, or is this just kind of like, we did it and now I'm going to chill out for a few years?
Yeah, I tend to not have an off switch, man. It's definitely like an awkward time, because like you said, yeah, I definitely feel like, hell yeah, we did it. But it's also like, okay, now what? Like, where what's the next thing? I don't know,
Mhm.
man. Um, I'm trying to just enjoy it, enjoy the time I have with the dogs that I do have. Because the one thing the dog mushing has taught me is 1 year is a big deal, especially in the eyes of a dog. Like, it can change a dog. One dog can be completely healthy right now, and a year from now, the dog can be, to the other side of the rainbow. So it's the one thing dog mushing has taught me. Being this close to this many dogs, is to appreciate each year that you have with the dogs that you do have, because it might be the last year you have with them. Little Buttercup, I don't know if you remember Little Buttercup that I had. She's one of probably my
Mhm.
most famous dogs that I have. Tiny little dog, but one of our best dogs that we had. Ran the Iditarod with me, and she actually finished every single race I've ever ran. And this was her last year. She retired. So, like, just being able to enjoy this last season with her, and like, that's the kind of stuff like I look at when I look at the dogs that I still have. Is we still got a lot of more adventures to have before we hang up dog mushing altogether. So
Hell yeah, dude. That's awesome, man. And you know, that's a great note to end it on. Thanks for coming on. Where can people still find you, support the kennel? Where can they, where can they find you on Instagram, and where can they go for the website?
Yeah, the best way to follow me is on Instagram. Frozen Trident's my handle. I'm in the process of kind of going back through and telling the Iditarod story, kind of breaking it down checkpoint by checkpoint. If you're interested in that, go ahead and follow along. And then we have a website, frozentrident.com. Yeah, that was the biggest way to follow us too, but that was more for the racing. Who knows what that's going to turn into here in the near future? But yeah, definitely give that a check out.
Hell yeah, bro. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.